Hey there everyone, AJ back again for the Mighty Gluestick channel. I make videos about Dungeons & Dragons lore full time thanks to your generous support, shares and views, with multiple uploads every week to share the rich history of monsters, locations and mythologies of D&D. This is another one of my rambling videos which you patrons get to listen to in advance of everybody else, where I just talk about a particular topic. And this time I wanted to share my thoughts on Planeswalkers from Magic the Gathering and Magic the Gathering in general, and what they represent in Dungeons & Dragons in context. So in a way, this is also a conversation about the tiers of play and the D&D multiverse and the implications of a fully realized pan-dimensional reality at the gaming table. First of all, it's generally understood that the player characters in any D&D game are somewhat remarkable individuals with skills, traits and abilities a cut above your average member of whatever race and culture they came from. A perfect example of this is the various humanoid non-player character listings in the back of the monster manual and Volo's guide and so on. A commoner is the default listing for an average human being, and they have stats of 10 across the board, and an armor class of 10, and only 1d8 hit points. That's it. So yes, a single strike with a sword is sufficient to kill your average person. Meanwhile, they have a 2 hit bonus of +2, and they usually attack with a fist or club, usually for no more than 1d4 points of damage. Unless they're using some simple weapon which is generally related to what they do for a livelihood, so it'll be a pitchfork or a hammer or such. A first level human fighter is already far superior in day-to-day life than your stock average commoner, merchant, scribe, peasant, artisan or whatever. Now at higher levels, say past level 5, the player character is renowned as a larger-than-life figure with skills, powers and abilities at the extreme end of what most people think is possible for a member of their race to achieve. They are kind of like the D&D version of an Olympic-level athlete, and beyond this level, they start to become figures of legend, folktale material, with abilities that most common folk would not really believe unless they witnessed it for themselves. So you think of yourself, think to yourself the first time you saw Usain Bolt running, for instance. I'll quite often refer to him, or Michael Phelps, for instance, swimming. They're Olympic-level athletes, but they're a cut above the competition to the point where they just blow away the competition because of some inherent natural trait that they have, which just far exceeds the norm. However, this is still what most Dungeons & Dragons players would call mid-level play. It forms the bulk of most D&D campaigns, and a lot of people prefer to start off their games with mid-tier player characters, particularly for one-shot games or mini-campaigns of a set number of sessions. Also, you can play campaigns where there's no level progression at all. The player characters don't gain new powers and abilities outside of what they gain through actual roleplay, so treasure and in-game time devoted to training. This may seem blasphemous to you, but I'm just including it here as one option, for example purposes, and a lot of people still play games like that. The current staff of Wizards of the Coast have said a number of times that most games don't progress much further than 10th level, so that would be the good end point of mid-level play. So you're starting to get into high-level play at that point. And beyond that, we have high-level play. A lot of people struggle with high-level play, character levels 10 to 15, where the character they're involved with events that can make or break kingdoms, save the whole world, and potentially where they routinely travel between dimensions and do things which become folklore, legend, the stuff of bardic tales that the average person will not really believe, even if they're seeing it with their own eyes. High-level characters are not just beyond the scope of ordinary common folk, they are beyond the control, really, of the usual leaders of the D&D world, the kings and queens, archbishops, magistrates, whatever lofty title, the people who issue the orders, spend the taxes, command the armies and run the guilds, institutions and factions, are almost always below the personal abilities of high-level player characters. Think about the most famous heroes of the Forgotten Realms. So, for instance, Drist is, I think at this point he's a 15th level multi-class fighter ranger. But most of the earlier events of his storied career, where he's in books and things, and even when Chris Perkins was playing him in an adventure recently, he was more like a level 8 to 10 cross-class fighter ranger with a set of magical items. But by the time your average player character hits a similar level from actual gameplay, they could wipe the floor with Drist, and most of them would have sold more magic items than Drist has ever actually seen. Results may vary, but this is my general experience with actual games of Dungeons & Dragons. They come across legendary artifacts on a fairly regular basis. Now, a group of high-level characters require very significant threats to challenge them. This is where you get high-level organizations and groups of allied evil creatures, or you get legendary epic-level monsters, including mythic individuals, who the average peasant would consider to be demigods. Epic-level characters are those who are beyond level 15, and NPCs NPCs who can take on a whole group of high-level player characters. This is where we start to encounter the Planeswalkers. Let's take a look at some of the Planeswalkers in Magic the Gathering lore, and I'm quoting directly from the Wizards of the Coast website here. So, first example is Raska, who's a Gorgon, or a Medusa, as we call them in D&D. She specialized in magic that involves assassination, stealth, and petrification. During her time on Ravnica, Raska has provided certain dark services to the Golgari faction. Her magic helps track her chosen marks through the fungus-choked tunnels of the Undercity, where she destroys her victims quietly. When necessary, she can even summon shadowy killers to do her dirty work for her. The Golgari Guild of Ravnica see her as a useful enigma, a shadowy death specialist who only responds to jobs which she wants in exchange for strange favours and obscure trophies. She likes collecting trophies. It's a trait of Medusa's. Raska's power is clear, but her true motivations are a mystery. She spends a significant portion of her time on planes other than Ravnica, which most of the residents of Ravnica don't realise that she actually does, using her death-dealing powers to slowly build a collection of petrified victims from across the universe. So she's a very powerful mage and assassin who is amassing power according to her own ambitions. And this reminds me very much of an old player character of one of my original DMs, who had he was an assassin who petrified monsters and victims simply so he could collect them in a dungeon level, and then when he wanted to, he could return them to flesh and blood to attack or whatever. So he had this collection of creatures, a menagerie. Another Planeswalker, Liliana Ves, once a noble-born healer of the plane of Dominaria, Liliana Ves first encountered necromancy in an attempt to heal her sick brother, but she inadvertently doomed him to spend eternity as one of the undead. What a horror. The terror of death and the pain of her guilt ignited her Planeswalker spark, and she found herself on the plane of Innistrad. More than a century later, Liliana tried to forever remain at the height of her power and conquer death by forging a pact with 4 of the multiverse's most powerful demons. The words of this pact remain written indelibly on her skin, but Liliana has never been one for servitude, and she's taking up regaining her freedom by defeating the 4 who bound her. Her quest for freedom led to her to the demonic Chain Veil, which she wrestled from Garrick after cursing him. Chained Veil amplifies her powers, but at great cost to her health and her sanity. With the power of the Chained Veil, she has conquered the first 2 of her demons, but she still has 2 others to hunt. Liliana's ambition has led her to interact with beings from all over the multiverse, but ultimately, Liliana's greatest love and first priority is, and has always been, herself. Jace Beleren is another Planeswalker, growing up as a magical prodigy on his home plane. Jace Beleren sought the training of the mysterious Sphinx, El Hammerat. Under the Sphinx's training, Jace learned to control his abilities. However, when Jace discovered that El Hammerat had been using him for political manipulations, he confronted his master, and in a fierce mental battle, he was badly wounded. The battle badly damaged Jace's memories and caused him excruciating pain, and he woke up in a state of amnesia. This distress ignited his Planeswalker spark, tearing him away from his home plane. Jace awoke on Ravnica, which I'm going to talk about in a second. His memories shattered and his former identity forgotten. During this time that he's been on Ravnica, he formed a romantic attachment to Liliana Ves, only to learn that she too was manipulating him and deceiving him. Jace's absence of memory now fuels his insatiable appetite for knowledge and truth. His need to uncover and understand the unknown has led him to Zendikar and back to Ravnica again. But he solved his mystery puzzle, the implicit maze, which I'm not too familiar with, but it's in this article. His achievements earned him the title of Ravnica's Living Guild Pact, where he serves as the magically empowered arbiter between the city's many guilds. After aiding in the defeat of 2 of the Eldrazi Titans on Zendikar, Jace took an oath to keep watch over the planes of the multiverse as part of the Gatewatch. The Gatewatch offers him the opportunity to think and act on a larger scale, which intrigues him as his mental challenge continues, in addition to appealing to his sense of responsibility. He can't walk away from an unsolved mystery, and he believes that everything that exists to be understood, and he dreams of one day knowing everything there is to know. A bold and lofty ambition. The story of Jace waking from his battle with no idea where he was or even who he is actually gives a perfect description of the trait that largely defines what a Planeswalker is, or more correctly, what they can do. And again, I'm quoting from the story of Jace here directly. An image of an unfamiliar place flashed through the man's mind. So he's just woken up on a seashore in a foreign world, looking down at his clothes with no idea who he is. Colour and light and the idea of a way. The man felt a tingle run down the back of his neck, and in a refreshingly cool rush of energy, he felt his entire body attempt to break itself apart, particles flickering and vanishing, his physical form wavering between one place and another. It was pleasant, familiar, comforting. He had done this before. His body was dissolving and breaking apart. It should have felt terrible, but instead it felt like him. He pushed toward the feeling, praying that if more of his body vanished, then more of his mind would return, this familiar feeling, only to feel himself yanked backward, pulled by some massive force back through whatever metaphysical door he had begun to walk through, away and down until he smashed back together on the same beach he had tried to depart. He fell to the ground with the shock of it. A shining triangle enclosed by a circle appeared in the air above him, and the man gasped through mended lungs. The pleasant chill faded. His body was whole, his hands were clammy with sweat, and his knees sunk into the sand. The man drew a breath after panicked, ragged breath. His heart beat a bruise against the inside of his chest. The man gripped his fists in confusion, took a full breath, and yelled the most illustrative swear word he could think of, a single, long, satisfying word, and into it he poured all the confusion and frustration he could muster. He finally stopped, and it could only hear the rhythm of the waves lapping on the shore. So, essentially, Planeswalkers are very rare individuals who, by whatever means, have the inherent ability to plane shift, as per the spell, but as a spell-like ability, without any of the spoken incantation and gestures, or the forked metal rod worth at least 250 gold, which is already attuned to a particular plane of existence. And this is something that I bet is normally overlooked by players and dungeon masters alike, but I think you should think about it for a minute. Do you need to be on that plane when you attune the precious metal rod to it? So, if you find yourself in an alien plane of existence, how do you attune a forked metal rod to that plane of existence? How much would a cleric or a sorcerer or a warlock or a wizard or a druid, who all have access to the spell, pay for that attuned rod? Because they need it to get there. You can't just teleport anywhere you want. You need that rod as though it were a key to that plane's door, essentially the antenna that tunes you into that plane's frequency. I remember now that the artificer gnome who played a magic synthesizer on the what was the He-Man's and Master of the Universe, the movie. And what was that synthesizer covered in? Forked metal rods. And what could it do? Teleport everything in a certain area to a different plane of existence. So yeah, what Planeswalkers can do, they just think about a different plane of existence, concentrate on it, and they can teleport there. The plane shift spell takes a casting time of 1 action. It also requires physical contact with whatever is being taken with the caster, including up to 8 other individual creatures who are all in physical contact with each other and the caster. The target of this contact teleportation don't have to be willing, though. So a spellcaster or planeswalker can use the spell to banish an unwilling creature to another plane of existence, and they choose a creature within their reach, touch it, and it's forced to make a charisma saving throw, or the creature fails to save and is transported to a random location or plane of existence the caster specifies. Now, charisma saving throw kind of implies that this is a psychic effect. Well, that's the way I interpret it anyway. Or a warlock type effect where essentially, or a sorcerer effect where they're essentially feeling magic and manipulating reality directly. Now the first level, the 7th level Conjuration spell limits the number of creatures to a maximum of 8, and there doesn't seem to be any level advancement protocol for casting this at higher level in order to teleport more creatures at a time, nor does it say how much non-creature material the caster can teleport at any one time either, which is an annoyingly vague oversight, I think. So this, let's just ignore this as a spell-like ability and instead consider it to be a very restricted spell-like feat, only available to NPCs and high-level player characters beyond level 15, for example. That would work quite well in a campaign, since by level 15, most high-level characters have probably got the ability to go zipping around between the planes of existence anyway on a semi-regular basis. So all we're really doing is giving a character a feat that defines their character by this mastery of planar travel. And that is really all the common ground between the Planeswalkers. That's where it comes to an end. Their backgrounds, planes of origin, species, skill sets, motivations are extremely diverse. Of course, mastery of magic is a very common trait, but it's not a strict requirement. And out onto the multiverse they go. What they do is largely their own concern, and few creatures or things can restrict their actions. They can just teleport to a different plane of existence. They're beyond mundane concerns for the most part. And as you would imagine, the great influence, the great concern, positive or negative, to a Planeswalker is the interference, alliance, or opposition of other Planeswalkers. And from that, well, that's the entire basis of the Magic the Gathering card game and the conflict therein. In Dungeons & Dragons, the scope to expand on the settings, the mid-tier environments, and those who are up-and-coming potential Planeswalkers is damn near infinite, and it is well overdue for this lore to get the exposure it truly deserves. Dungeons & Dragons has seemingly a lot of settings that you can visit and tell your stories in. We have Toril, we have Oerth, we have Eberron, we have Athos, we have Kryn, we have Mystara, there's a few others. Magic the Gathering brings us potentially Alara, Amonkhet, Dominaria, Fiora, Innistrad, Ixalan, Kaladesh, Kamigawa, Lorwyn in the Shadowmoor, Mirrodin, New Pyrexia, which is one of my favourites, Ravnica, Shadowvar, Tarkir, Theros, and Zendikar. And that's, 16 new world settings? It's mind-blowing. Nothing is stopping us from making use of this lore already, of course. As Dungeon Masters, you can grab whatever setting info you want, and there are any number of ways for a group of player characters of any level to suddenly find themselves on these new worlds. Or you can just homebrew whatever you want. Send them to the world of Krull. Send them to Shannara. Send them to Middle-earth. It's entirely up to you. But I want there to be people doing this in organised play. I want there to be new artwork, terrain, miniatures, virtual tabletop files, source books, custom character sheets, new races, new character classes, and most juicy of all, for me anyway, new monsters and magical items. I just want more D&D stuff in general, really. And this is like an untapped gold mine that we're just about to start digging into. I'm excited. And for the bar humbug crowd, the misers who object to spending money on the hobby, once again, more stuff for others never equates to less stuff for you. Second edition didn't alter one iota from the introduction of later editions. Second edition books don't magically erase when new stuff comes along. You can play any old edition you want to your heart's desire. Nobody ever has or ever will stop you from freezing the game in time and just playing it how you want to. Plus, you will always find people who want to play that version of the game. But there are a great many of us who crave new stuff, who dive into every new edition and find things in them to love. I loved 4th edition. I loved 5th edition. I loved D&D Basic. I would happily sit down and play a game of Pathfinder 2nd edition. I don't care. It's all D&D to me. So, a message to Wizards of the Coast. I want more. I want it regularly. I want it well supported. I want it at a reasonable price and printed on a book that's going to last for decades. I want to be able to play online. I want to be able to play it with random strangers at game stores and convention halls. I want accessories. I want movies. I want cartoons, graphic novels, 3D printable miniature terrain files I can make at home. I want celebrity games. I want podcasts. I want Twitch streams. I want it all, and I want more. And as for me, that's enough for now. As always, thanks for listening, everyone. I'll be back with more for you very soon.